Welcome, everyone. My name is David LaFond. I started in this space much earlier than it was called cybersecurity, and primarily because I worked for a lot of e-commerce or web-based companies that had their systems on the internet. And much earlier than we knew about incident response from a cybersecurity perspective, or knew about cybersecurity itself, or is termed cybersecurity, is we were performing incident response. We just didn't have it formalized as today it's more recognized. So we're going to talk a little bit about incident response here and the way it works. If you have any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. This is supposed to be not just a webinar where I talk, but we want it to be interactive. So if you have questions, if you have maybe sort of an incident that you're aware of publicly, I would not share any private incidents related to security on this call. But if you have any, questions about public incidents or things of that nature, that would be great to include as part of this discussion. We're happy to include that. So what are security incidents in particular? When we're talking about security incidents, we're really talking about digital or physical breaches. And that could be breaches of data or access, right? That threatens confidentiality, integrity, and availability of an organization or a company's systems or data. And if it was mentioned on this call, we have a lot of people involved with incident response. So critical to incident response or security incidents is an understanding of the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, or availability, or the combination of all three, which is fundamental to an overall security practitioner's understanding of how to address security or cybersecurity. And in the context of digital or cybersecurity, when we talk about incidents, some of those security incidents could be bad, right? Something called ransomware, phishing, DDoS, and it could be a combination of the two, or it could be standalone. It really runs the gamut. Like a DDoS attack might result in some other activity. A phishing attack might result in ransomware, right? And that's sort of where you see the results of something like phishing, or the larger umbrella around social engineering, which I think we've given a webinar in the past about social engineering. So if you have any questions about that, you can look up that webinar. More particularly, when we talk about ransomware, ransomware is a type of, or an effect of some type of malicious software, malware, virus that could, for lack of better words, lock up a victim's data or lock up their computing device. It kind of renders that company or that person unable to perform their job. And when you talk about the CIA triad, most people are concerned about confidentiality, integrity of that data, but really you're talking about availability. If someone cannot perform their job or not access their data, that's an availability concern, right? So that's stuff you'll learn about in the boot camp. That's stuff you'll learn about to be prepared to sit for some of the security certifications that we prepare our students for. And that's some of the things we talk about. As Jonathan mentioned, I teach some of the courses in the boot camp when necessary to fill in. And I also teach in other schools as well. These are pretty fundamental concepts. Ransomware probably is more talked about than CIA, but at the fundamental level, you're talking about the CIA triad. Another example here, we have phishing. And phishing could be digital messages that really they're trying to attempt to sort of find a hole, for lack of sort of better understanding, but to manipulate the recipient to do something that they didn't think they were doing, or to share some information like confidential information, maybe a username and password, so that attacker can do something with that information. They might be able to then take another step and act on that user's behalf. And I think a big example of that recently is related to Microsoft, their cloud, something to do with Azure keys might be a good thing to look up. the sort of scenario around that, where basically they were able to phish an engineer who had access and obtain their sensitive information, which were keys to the system, so that they could perform some other type of attack. And then you have this thing called DDoS, right? These are intended to gain remote control, or they could be intended to overwhelm or reduce the availability of a system. And long time ago, I remember, I was involved with some incident. We didn't know much about DDoS. We knew it was possible, but our system got overwhelmed with 600,000 requests from all over the world. And that was a distributed DDoS attack, or DDoS. So a little bit more about security incidents. You could have supply chain attacks, and a prominent one there is SolarWinds, where the attack was intended to infiltrate an organization through a vendor. So one company's security got compromised, which then compromised the security of its customers, and hence supply chain, right? So you move along the software supply chain, and if each vendor does not have really good security controls that are maintained and monitored, you could potentially introduce, an incident further down the chain, whether that be the second tier, could be the third tier, or even the fourth tier vendor, who are all chained together in their supply delivery of services, but may have the ability to, provide a sort of pathway for an attack to make it into another company. And then you also have internal threats. And these types of threats could be due to multiple factors, whether they be due to a malicious employee, or, untrained employee, or quite possibly someone negligent within the organization. Could be a contractor as well. All right, so when we talk about incident response, it's great to know about what it is, but what companies really need is an incident response team. And typically these are called CSIRT, cybersecurity incident response teams. And depending on what nomenclature you use, but I think this is the NIST nomenclature, the teams are made up of some pretty well-known individuals in a company. That's typically the information security officer or CISO, the SOC leader or the SOC staff, maybe some IT staff. It's really good to include some executive team members to help sort of understand what an incident is, how decisions need to be made to respond to incidents, representatives from your legal team, whether they be internal or external. And sort of what's typically not known to everyone is including more teams involved with the incident response process provides a much more effective means to sort of respond to incidents. Because if the IT department is responding to a website incident related to DDoS, but then the marketing, sales, and engineering team don't know about it, they could do other work that could either make that worse, or, maybe take the, some happens where they takes the system down, or some other effect, right? So having representatives, having individuals informed, however that occurs, is really valuable to the effectiveness of having an incident response team established and able to be trained and communicated, right? You could have additionally members from the human resources team, someone from the compliance and or regulation area, maybe even if your company has it, a member or representative from risk management. These are all valuable individuals to include in that incident response team makeup. And then how does it work? Well, you just, my example earlier about we just did it, that doesn't sort of work anymore. Companies really have, the attacks nowadays are so sophisticated from a cyber point of view. Companies really have to have planning in place first, right? They can't just sort of willy-nilly go at incident response and it to work, sort of expect it to work effectively. right, related to incident response are a couple different important characteristics. Is you want to be able to detect the issue quickly. You want to be able to validate that issue quickly. And you want to be able to respond to that issue appropriately depending on your organization. So to make, sort of the key areas are planning, making sure a process exists, and then testing that process to make sure that, you're prepared, right? If an incident does occur. As part of the planning process, this is guided typically by first a policy, but then a plan, right? The plan is to develop and execute, that team member's responsibilities, to define them and allow them and give them that responsibility so they could perform the functions, right? Or delegate those functions to members of their own team or additional members of the response team. And that incident response plan should include or define what of your incident controls or security controls or solutions that you might have in place. Something very simple in today's IT stack, if you want to refer to it in their makeup, would be a SIM. And a SIM is a place where you go for correlation of event activity. Well, if you don't have that in place, and if you've not done the planning to identify you need such a thing, you might be sort of at a disadvantage if an incident does occur. And then sort of to back all that up is to make sure that, instead of fighting this fire, this incident, and then the company not being able to do their work, you want to make sure that there's integrated with the incident response plan is some business continuity plan or disaster recovery plan to help you sort of understand when you're wanting to take the steps to possibly restore or to move over to backup systems, what is going to happen and how that'll occur. So we talked about this, a little bit, but clearly having a detailed response methodology or plan with specific steps, meaning, what happens when someone sends an email that suspicious activity is occurring? What happens when someone sends that email to the IT support desk? What is the IT support desk supposed to do? Are they supposed to call that individual right away? Should they escalate and report that to their manager? Should they, notify the InfoSec team or the information security team? Having those specific steps documented and communicated is important to make sure that company knows how they're responding in each phase of incident response. And that includes what I just mentioned, a communication plan. Because maybe the CEO wants to know if there's a potential problem, or maybe CEO only wants to know if it's related to certain systems or certain data, or maybe the CEO just doesn't know they're supposed to be informed about this, because from a risk management point of view, if no one's raised the risk to the right people in the organization, there's no input into understanding how to sort of delegate enough resources to investigate the issue or to respond to the issue. So bringing in company leaders, additional employees, informing them and maybe pulling them into a meeting is critical. And then as the notes here on the last item, having those instructions in place and reviewing those instructions, whether it be through testing, exercise, or review, is really important to make sure you have the proper planning and plan in place to make sure that you could and your organization could handle incidents, especially security or cybersecurity related, appropriately. And this doesn't sort of just apply to cybersecurity. This could apply to your daily life. What happens if your car breaks down? Do you have a plan B, right? Are you set up with Uber already if that's your plan B? Are you set up with Lyft? Can you call somebody particularly for that ride if you need to arrive or go someplace in an urgent manner and you're unable to use your vehicle because maybe the battery just went dead because the door was not closed 100% and drained, the light in your car. or drain the battery from the light in the car. Sorry. Or maybe you rode over a nail or a screw, and then overnight your tire went flat, right? That's sort of being prepared for those things will make sure that when you wake up in the morning and you only have a 10-minute window to get to work, that you can make a quick decision such that you're not late, or maybe you have to notify someone, same as communication plan. You take the right steps to make sure things are taken care of and managed in the appropriate manner.
Hey, David, we've got some questions in the chat if you want to take a look at those.
Sure. Why don't you share one of the What communication channels should incident response teams having during an incident? Well, that's a good question. And Jeffrey, I'm going to ask you the question back. Are you aware of what your company uses or what you might use for those channels? Like, what would you use today? Not every company is the same. Anyone else want to share what they may or may not be using today? Sorry, I can't see all the chats at once. Does anyone have Slack in their company, or SMS? Or maybe you got something more advanced, like something called PagerDuty, which is a system that automatically communicates with individuals. Or much like this call, you have Zoom or you have Microsoft Teams, right? Those are mechanisms. And not to get, this might be out of scope for this class or this talk here, but based on the type of incident, whether it's related to sensitive information or proprietary information or very tightly managed internal security information or proprietary information, you might not use the same channels, right? Those sort of channels should be sort of already prepared, right, in the preparation step and defined within your incident response plan. And I think the next question, which would lead into, is this referred to as a playbook? Well, a playbook could be actually a more detailed approach. So you might have a security incident, but a playbook helps you to respond specifically to a certain type of security incident, whether that be phishing. You might have a playbook for phishing. You might have a playbook for ransomware. And they might be similar or a little bit different, right? Because depending on the severity and maybe depending on the sort of the impact of that threat, you might pull in additional people during the process to help you do, we look at, I'm going to relate it to this incident response process diagram. It might help you perform more detection and analysis because you might have to bring in some experts. Or after you do that, you might have to bring in more experts to do containment, eradication and discovery. Hopefully that answers your question about playbook. I think it's a good point from Amber. You put this in terms of money. Usually that is a good way to connect your business continuity or your business planning processes to priorities. That's a great point. The next question here is, does incident response team use only one incident response playbook or various? I think that depends on the organization and their maturity. You could have a chain of playbooks that you're using depending on how you respond to the detection and analysis phase, or maybe even in the containment, eradication, and discovery phase, or maybe also in the post-incident activity. Right? There could be a sort of situation, and I think I've had to deal with this in the past, where maybe you're using, you're operating a pretty complex website environment, and that website environment has multiple systems that make up that website environment. Well, it could be possible that you can sustain operating. One of those systems can be taken offline, and you might not get real up-to-date data from that point forward until the post-incident activity is resolved. But you may be able to sustain staying in the same environment, not invoking maybe a business continuity stage or another step before you determine what is next to do. And it's a good point. So you have possibly SOPs or standard operating procedures. Well, those maybe are defined procedures in addition to policies and other guidance that might be defined, so that you can sort of already prepare, right, the steps or the response that you're going to perform, or the detection and containment steps, right? That is definitely part of, or could be defined as SOPs. And this is a good point. Not all companies have SOPs or they might not even have a lot of playbooks. They might not even have any playbooks for that matter, right? It really depends. And sort of this is the opportunity in cybersecurity. As we learn more, as we develop more processes, companies of all different levels are maturing at different stages. And it's not only just smaller companies that may not have the level of sophistication talked about in the chat, but that's where individuals who come into our boot camp learn those techniques, learn these skills, develop and hone so that they can go out and help organizations do this work. Because by no means, shape, and form is it easy to manage an incident response process. It's a lot of work. And as stated in the chat, it's a lot of documentation. It's a lot of specification. It's a lot of preparation, but also it's a lot of knowledge about company culture. And it's a lot of knowledge about skill levels in an organization and systems. Really, it's a very complex type sort of process companies need to take a look at to make sure that they're able to be prepared enough to withstand whatever their defined risks are, and make sure they can continue to operate. Or if they do choose not to operate, and maybe they're able to withstand certain financial impact or a certain other impact, they at least understand what that is. All right, I'm going to quickly, I'm sorry if I missed someone in the chat. Again, it depends on your company. So if you don't have sophisticated systems like Slack or Teams, or, maybe you can use Google Chat or Google Groups if you have that. I'm sure, most companies or most individuals on this call have some email type productivity tool set. Think about how you can use that. And another way to do incident response might even be have a Google Doc, set up a template. These are our steps. And that's your template for every time you have an incident response that could be shared with all your team members. It could be that simple, right? It could also be much more sophisticated depending on the ins and outs of your company. All right, I'm going to shoot down to the last chat point here. I'm just reading it right now. Investigation. I'm not sure if this is a question, unless you could say you could performing investigation through an SMS system, and you're using Teams or cell text. I would say, before you take from this call any specific way to perform incident response or start doing it, you want to talk to the individuals at your company to make sure they're comfortable with the channels, communication channels you might be using. You might not want to, start up a channel in MS Teams that has access from everyone in the company, and then, you notify individuals in your company and say, hey, we got this new incident response channel. And, you tell people, hey, let us know about if there's a security incident. Well, not everyone in the company, and this is where security awareness, another component, comes into play, understands what a security incident is. So if they categorize a security incident through communication of just notifying about some activity, maybe their computer's running slow. Well, if they say their computer's hacked because their computer's running slow, that might trigger a lot of people to respond to that activity who wouldn't necessarily need to respond to that activity. So having the right communication plan, understanding the channels and how to communicate, and educating your staff and your other teammates how to do this properly is really critical. Real quick, I know we touched on this, but I want to make sure we hit it. Incident response process, preparation, detection, analysis, containment, eradication and discovery, and then post-incident activity. And you'll see here that they're all linked and they all chain back to each other. because an important part, and I don't know, it's not really a scope for this call, but an important component of post-incident activity is making sure you have a follow-up with your team members, because maybe part of the post-incident activity, you've discovered that your communication plan is not detailed enough, or you've discovered that it's got old cell phone numbers in there. If that's your mechanism of communication and escalation, you want to make sure you go back after incidents and understand how you can improve, right? And that's why I circle back to preparation. So let's take a look real quick about the steps. So eradication, this is the step where once the threat is contained, move to a step where you remediate and try and remove the intrusion or whatever the security incident from a system, or address the issue that was reported. Recovery is a step where sort of you make sure that you, if necessary, if information was modified, or if systems were sort of infected and can't be cleaned up, you might have to restore some systems, and you might have to restore some data to a certain state or a certain level of integrity as part of CIA. And then, as I was discussing, post-incident review, post any activity, whether it be a virus, whether it be adware, whether it be malware, maybe it didn't even cause a breach, but you want to make sure you're performing some post-incident review, some post-incident action to see how you could, be better prepared next time. Or you may just take a moment, after all that, what they call firefighting activity of incident response, maybe you want to check a few more systems to make sure that other things were not affected as part of the security incident or security event. So there's technologies, right? I referred to something as SIEM, SIEM, and then there's SOAR, which is basically SIM on steroids, right? It gives you sort of more, if you want to call it AI or enhanced capabilities, that help you deal with larger data sets. It's really focused on, providing more automation to an incident event management system, which is called SIM. I think that's a good point, Charles. Definitely want to take a look at your incident response plan, post an incident or even during an incident, and note if there's things you need to address. Does anyone in their company help manage a SIM or a SOAR? You could just put a thumbs up. There you go. Is anyone on the call, you have some sort of like a SIM and a SOAR, you have two parts. You have somebody who uses the system, right, to look for activity, maybe put in some queries or, structure some, notifications. But does anyone actually work on keeping that system up and running, from an operations point of view? It's pretty challenging. Would you agree, Amber? So the major challenge is, as cybersecurity grows, things like a SIM and a SOAR, they're relied on much more, but more so that data set that they're dealing with and the number of systems typically that they're integrated with will increase over time, right? And even if your number of integrated systems do not increase, typically the level of integration from those systems, whether it be from an application, whether it be from the network, whether it be from the operating system, whether it be turning on auditing on that system, will increase that level of information provided to your visibility tools, right? Like a SIM or a SOAR. Because why is that important? Well, the more orchestration you could do, the better, you could respond, or the faster you could respond to security incidents, or more incidents you could detect. And it helps you to enable a better understanding of threats, a better built IRP, incident response plan, better or improved processes that are always tested, increases your threat intelligence. And maybe you can provide some other intelligence to other team that's not even necessarily security related. In the older days, there was never like a defined SIM or a SOAR. Those are sort of come about and nomenclature in the last 5 or so years. You used to have a log server for your infrastructure without any intelligence in that log server. People could make queries, but there really was no intelligence. Nowadays, you could stand up one of these systems and you could start getting alerts, but then you have to do something about those alerts. And orchestration helps you to automate so that the right people, processes, and technology are able to utilize these systems and then distribute tasks so people can look into issues, right? So as we get more sophisticated and as we learn more about cybersecurity, so do our tools, so do our people, and so do our processes. And again, these are things you learn as part of the boot camp. Maybe a good tool that, I don't know how many people still use this, but Splunk, really well known for its SIM capabilities. And then you have other tools or systems that have SOAR functionality that help to put additional automation on top to sort of help teams better respond or better detect or better protect organizations. All right, I get ahead of myself here. So we've talked about automation, right? So an area that's not typically talked about in cybersecurity, because most people are trying to get into cybersecurity by learning the mass amount of information needed to be effective, whether it's in Linux, in Windows, in any type of system and any type of application, but more so is the ability to provide automated tasks that allow these individuals, cybersecurity professionals, to work faster and really work towards prioritizing higher value alerts. So this is a tricky statement, higher value alerts. People want to know what that is. Well, that bar is constantly changing, right? It's changing on the type of threats that companies are facing. But also, if you're in a company that maybe has a website that releases changes on a regular basis, that could be daily, could be hourly. I've worked in companies where we had full application releases at least 35 times a day. So if your application on the internet is changing 35 times a day, quite possibly your higher value alerts could change throughout that day as well. So there's a moving target around some of this and why automation is important. And, to the point here below, sort of automation and being a security professional with the ability to enable automation can empower security teams to be more efficient and really make them more effective at making decisions in incident response. And the end result is hopefully you're making your companies more secure. But in a lot of companies, it's not necessarily more secure, but making sure you meet compliance requirements to at least have such a thing in place. And then having a process to investigate those things, either categorize them as important, critical, or not important. Okay, so a little bit more about technologies. In today's world, you moved on from antivirus, and we're talking about XDR or NDR. XDR is probably the more advanced term than NDR, network detection and response versus endpoint detection and response. I think this detection and response automated tool set naming is growing very quickly. And you see that with companies like CrowdStrike and SentinelOne, so they've sort of moved into that market. But it's getting more complicated for companies because maybe you could have all these tools, but depending on your infrastructure, you might need additional tools that integrate with these tools to give you a complete set of visibility. And honestly, it's a moving target again, where if your operating systems and users are using those systems, it's possible that users introduce more risk, and it just be normal business risk on a daily basis. Maybe someone saved a mortgage file to the file share and no one did that before. Well, what is the risk to the company? Well, number one is if you have the right controls in place and you're making sure you discover and monitor, you identify the risks and prioritize them. You have in place the ability to identify adversary tactics and can respond to their techniques. And you have the ability to perform remediation. You might be a good step, but also you might just be using your visibility tools to then say, oh, let's take a look at that. And, like a Google Drive gives you a report for an organization. As part of your preparedness, you want to take a look at those things, not just have the response tools in place, but you want to make sure that you take a look at those things and say, where is my most sensitive data? And how can I ensure it's well protected, right? So the process is end to end, from preparation to post-incident incident review.
Hey, David, we've got some more chat comments that I don't think you've hit, starting with Amber at 12:41 p.m.
I'm trying to sneak them into my...
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make sure you were aware.
All right, let me take a step back. What time we got? So we got 12 minutes left here. Let me try and get through these slides real quick, and then I'll hit back on the questions real fast. So I've not given up on the questions. I'm trying to weave them into my presentation here, but I will definitely hit them before I'm done. Is that fair?
Absolutely.
Okay, so now we can hit them, right? So let's talk about, I will jump back here at 12, what time frame, Jonathan?
12:41. It was a comment from Amber. I think that's the most recent one that you had not hit yet.
Okay, so this is a good point someone makes, cloud managed SIEM. I think it's good that companies can access cloud managed SIEMs, but there's so many different flavors. And even though yours, somebody made a note, not really a pain to manage, it's a good service to have. It would be really good to get training, whether it's self-paced training or, sort of organization-based training, or even boot camp training, to sort of understand the level of features within that SIEM. So full disclosure, I've worked for Amazon, I've worked for Etsy, I've worked for Dow Jones and Hearst, I worked for AI companies, I've worked at a lot of big organizations. Actually, my goal was not to be related to computer technology. I wanted to be in marine engineering. That has nothing to do with computers. But be aware when you're talking about systems, what the features are, what the features you might want to have, and what the features you don't need and do not need to pay for. So a lot of systems may sort of sell you on the idea, oh, this does everything you need. But if you don't need that feature, you're paying for something you really don't need. On the reverse side, if you signed up for a service and you're sharing all your information with that service, be aware what the terms and conditions are, run that through your team members and legal department to ensure, because most SIEM or SOAR technologies are dealing with sensitive information, and you want to make sure you take the right approach to onboard those vendors, whether it be from a contractual point of view, but also from a product point of view, and make sure you got the right coverage. Charles says, developing new use cases. Yes, I think what we're learning from cybersecurity is that as professionals come up with answers, the criminals come up with better techniques, right? Things keep changing. That's just the nature of the business. Question from Amber here. Is there any way to improve processes without it being tested with an actual response? I would say that it is possible. I wouldn't say it would be recommended, because if you're trying to improve the process when the incident response is occurring, you could make a mistake. Number one, if you don't have the full knowledge of how to handle incident response, because what we didn't talk about here was forensics collection and all kinds of other components of cybersecurity that roll up under incident response. So I would say it's possible that you can test it, but it's almost like if you're comfortable with driving your car with bald tires with no spare, then that's just how you operate, right? No one can tell you that you might need to get your tires replaced or make sure you have your spare tire ready. It's just good practice to make sure you're well prepared, or at least prepared enough such that you could respond appropriately. And responding appropriately could be calling the right external party, whether that be something like CISA or the FBI, at the right moment to get the right help that you need. It could also mean you might need to call your company's lawyers at the right time. So it's not always a good practice to run hot on incident response. It would be good to at least set up a 1-page or 2-page document of some of the details to ensure that you have a plan in place. Sure, log servers can help to feed the SIM. That's a good point. Amber also says, depending on the industry you're in, sure has different types of threats, but I would also say that each company could have similar threats, right? Each company, if they rely on email and they have a lot of sensitive information in email, every company has the same threat there. So monitoring your email system for access to ensure that the right users are accessing that, having the right controls in place are important, but also having a process, and someone talked about playbooks, having a process in place sort of like that determines the steps you take if someone reports that information is missing from their email system or quite possibly got hacked, or someone reported a company that they got a hold of a document or an email. Having that in place beforehand for all companies would be very important. And I think the last point is really good. So I just saw the last point up here, update here in the chat, is they have this thing called TTX, and that's not really part of this masterclass. Might be a good another masterclass talk about, is to practice your incident response after you've done the preparation, is to practice with what they call tabletop exercises to ensure that not only are you prepared, but your team is prepared to act with the right processes in place, and that they're trained appropriately in sort of a test scenario, and then you can learn more from that activity as well. It's not normal that every company do tabletop exercises. It is a good practice for sure. And to answer the question before about running hot on incident response, is a good practice would be to schedule that tabletop exercise and see how your incident response process or lack thereof performs during that tabletop exercise.
I think this, the chat conversation and then David's responses to the chat conversation have been incredibly insightful. We have obviously some pretty knowledgeable people on this call, as well as some other people who are trying to learn more. So I think it's a good case study of how CyberWarrior works. One day, one person is the expert on a topic, and they help somebody out, and then the next day those roles are reversed because the topic goes to something else, where the person who was confused about topic X knows a lot about topic Y, and the person who helped him out needs that help. So I think that's pretty cool. What other are there any other questions from the group that people want to discuss about incident response? I know that there have been a ton of questions about or comments about gamified learning. That's something that we do a lot of here at CyberWarrior. We do competitive exercises on phishing and on other things that people may be interested in. If you want to talk about that, we working with CISA, we have access to tabletop exercises, et cetera. And that's the beauty of being a partner with CISA. So if anyone is interested in that kind of a conversation, I am eager to have that with you. And I would bring in David because David would be my technology alter ego.
Let me address that last question. I think that's a good question. So we haven't talked about on this call cyber insurance, and that's sort of a changing topic as well, and quite possibly. So the question is, if the incident response plan was ineffective, will cyber insurance come in? And I would say the answer is depends on your plan. And honestly, nowadays, a lot of cyber insurance carriers are not covering things that were done in the past because there's so much knowledge about cyber threats, cyber attacks. And there's easy ways to get notifications about such activity from various sources, whether it be vendors, whether it be CISA or anyone else. Cyber insurance providers, they don't want to pay for everything, right? And it would be good to make sure you've read and understood cyber insurance policy, or at least have someone in your organization help answer that question. Because, sometimes even with a home, things you thought might be covered are not covered by home insurance. So better to understand, and I would put that in the category of be prepared. So there is a huge communication, a lot of information. We're coming up here on October, which is Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And it's a good opportunity for a lot of people who are here on the call, and a lot of, as Jonathan mentioned, talked about, provided a lot of good feedback about incident response. Our intention on this call was to introduce some of the concepts, but it's a really big topic, incident response. And from a cybersecurity professional's perspective, there are a tremendous number of opportunities for individuals to help with incident response, whether that be from SOC analyst to incident coordinator to other activities within companies, even involving security awareness, because preparation, the category of preparation could be very large. Also, the category of post-incident activity could be very large. Additionally, those two middle areas, which talk about a high level of cybersecurity skill, those could be in-house skills for companies or could be farmed out to organizations, whether they be like Mandiant or a lot of larger, sophisticated IR-related organizations. So there's a lot of opportunity there. And as Jonathan mentioned, CyberWarrior, we're training individuals to understand and help to start careers in a lot of these areas. And one of the most important things is, as you get into maybe the boot camp, or you ask us to help with some services or help coordinate some activities. I think we're just asked recently to help do something, for another school. It's important because we're all still learning. And this is sort of a learning environment, cybersecurity. And it's really fast-paced learning environment, but it's really exciting because there are a tremendous amount of current opportunities and roles, but also there's going to be new roles that pop up or get termed or require staffing as we learn more about cybersecurity.
You guys, if you want to do a boot camp like CyberWarrior Academies, we can, and you mentioned this Masterclass event and you want to sign up, we can take $2,000 off of your tuition not today, but by the 24th of September. If you mention it, we would take $2,000 off your tuition. And Clara is putting information on the chat right now, and she would be the person you speak with. Also, again, there are a lot of people who are looking for ideas around tabletop exercises, updating IR plans, etc. We would love to have that conversation with you to see if we can help you in those areas as well. Just have a casual conversation, if nothing else. And those casual conversations are are, free except for time. So would love to stay in touch with you guys. I've been chatting with a few of you here. I hope we stay in touch. And please let us know how we can help your company or your career, or both. Because if we can help your company, that may be a big boost to your career in direct and indirect ways. David, you want to add anything final, or are we good? It's 1:04, so we're up against the clock.
So the only other idea I had from this call, because there's a lot of good idea, and I think Jeffrey Rodriguez just responded, is anyone have a specific topic that we could help to present as a masterclass, that they might be interested in learning more about? We're happy to sort of take that information as well. And feel free to email Clara or Jonathan. You can find me on LinkedIn, but you could email them to sort of let us know, what's a good topic that you're interested in participating in.
And Jeff, to that point, Jeffrey, ransomware is one of the masterclass topics that we have in the queue already. We've ran it a couple of times already, and my guess is it'll be run again in the next 4 to 6 months. But yeah, ransomware is a huge topic. We do phishing, we do ransomware, we do deep fakes. We are going to have next month, I believe, we're going to have the integration between AI and cybersecurity, because that's an incredibly hot topic right now. We're going to put together an Internet of Things, IoT, masterclass as well.